My phone rang while I was sanding an old oak table. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. I already knew it was my sister, Mason. Her voice had that stretched out sound she used right before asking for something. I have a challenge for you. I told her no before she even said what it was. She laughed anyway. There's a girl, Emily. Works at the library. Sweetest person you'll ever meet, but she hasn't been on a date in years. Sarah, you're always fixing broken furniture, she said. Maybe try talking to someone instead. I agreed just to get her off the phone. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Emily barely said 10 words all night. But right before she left, she stopped and turned back around. Thank you, she said. Then, softer, most people stop inviting me after the first 10 minutes. I sat in my truck a long while after she walked away. I hadn't planned on calling her again. Now I couldn't stop wondering why anyone would. My mornings never changed much. Coffee at 6, black, no sugar. Drank standing up at the counter because I never saw the point in sitting down for something that only took 5 minutes. Rusty waited by the door with his tail thumping against the floorboards like he had somewhere important to be, even though most days the only place either of us went was down the back stairs into the workshop. The smell hit me the same way every morning. Sawdust, old varnish, linseed oil. A smell that had settled so deep into the walls I couldn't really smell it anymore. Not the way a stranger would walking in for the first time. It was just the smell of home. I'd been restoring furniture since I was 17, working the same lathe my father used, in the same building he built with his own 2 hands back before I was born. People brought me things they thought were finished. Broken chairs, water-stained dressers, tables nobody wanted anymore, and I gave them a second life. There was something about that work that made sense to me in a way most things didn't. My father died 5 years ago. Heart, the doctor said, though I always figured it was more the workshop that kept him going than anything else. And once it was mine instead of his, some part of him just let go all at once. I inherited the building, the tools, a half-finished rocking chair he never got around to, and a quiet I never quite learned how to fill. I hadn't dated much before he passed. After, I stopped trying altogether. Work was easier. Work didn't ask questions I couldn't answer, and it didn't mind if I skipped dinner some nights and just kept sanding until my hands ached. My sister Sarah asked plenty, though. She called most Sunday afternoons, usually to tell me I was turning into an old man before my time, usually while I had sawdust in my hair and hadn't noticed the sun going down. That particular Sunday, she called with something else on her mind entirely. There's someone I want you to meet, she said, and I could hear she was smiling. Sarah always smiled when she was up to something. I'm not interested. You don't even know who it is yet. Doesn't matter. Her name's Emily. Works at the library. Quiet as anything, but Mason, she's kind. Genuinely kind. And she hasn't dated anyone in years. I think you two would actually understand each other. I told her I had a table to finish, one that had come in with a cracked leg and a client waiting. She told me the table would still be there tomorrow. She was right, of course. Sarah usually was, which was half the reason I hated arguing with her. One dinner, she said. That's all I'm asking. You're always fixing broken furniture. Maybe try talking to someone instead. I don't know why that line got to me. Maybe because it was true, and maybe because some part of me had been waiting for somebody to say it out loud. Emily Carter was 31, and she'd worked at the Millbrook Library for almost 8 years. I'd seen her around town before, always with a book tucked under her arm, always walking a little faster than everyone else, like she was trying not to be noticed by anybody. She had light brown hair she kept pulled back in a low knot, and eyes that looked at everything the way you'd look at a page you meant to finish. When I picked her up that Friday, she was waiting outside the library instead of at her apartment, which I understood without her explaining it. Some people don't like the extra step of someone walking up to their door. She got in the truck quietly, said a soft hello, and folded her hands in her lap the whole ride over, like she was holding herself together with them. The restaurant was the only nice one in town, the kind with cloth napkins and candles that didn't quite hide the smell of fryer oil drifting out from the kitchen. I asked her about the library. She answered in a few careful words and then went quiet, looking down at her plate. I asked about her family. Same thing happened. Somewhere around the salad course, she looked up at me, with something like embarrassment written across her face. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not very good at this. Neither am I said, and that was the first time she almost smiled, just a small pull at the corner of her mouth before she caught it. We didn't talk much after that, but it wasn't the kind of silence that made my skin itch to fill it up with noise. It was easier than I expected, easier than most conversations I'd had in years. I noticed she ate slowly, cutting small bites and taking her time. I noticed she said thank you to the waiter every single time he came by, like she meant it each time. I noticed her hands were steady even when the rest of her seemed nervous, folding and unfolding her napkin under the table where she probably thought I couldn't see. After dinner, I offered to drive her home, but she asked if we could walk instead. It wasn't far. The evening had cooled off some, that first hint of fall in the air, and the streetlights were just starting to come on along Maple Street, that stretch of old houses built back before anyone in town could remember who first laid the foundations. "I love this street," she said. The first full sentence she'd offered all night without me asking first. She stopped in front of a sagging Victorian with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. "Look at the trim work. Somebody carved that by hand a long time ago. Most people just see a house that needs work," I said. "I don't know why people stop seeing the beauty once something needs a little care." She said it simply, like it wasn't a big thought at all, just an obvious one she'd always known. I didn't say anything back right away. I was too busy realizing she'd just described exactly what I did for a living, except she was talking about something else entirely, something I couldn't quite name yet. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She glanced at the screen, and whatever she saw there made her go still for a second, her smile folding up and disappearing like a light switched off somewhere behind her eyes. She silenced it without answering and slid the phone back into her pocket like she was hiding it. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said, too quickly, and picked up her pace just slightly. We didn't talk much the rest of the walk. When we reached her building, she turned to face me on the steps, and for a moment, I thought she might just say goodnight and go inside without another word, the way the whole evening had gone. Instead, she said, "Thank you." I told her I had a good time, which was true, even if it surprised me some to say it out loud. She paused, like she was deciding whether to say the next part. Then she did. "Most people never ask twice," she said. "After tonight, I mean." She didn't wait for me to answer. She just gave a small, tired smile and went inside, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood on those steps longer than I needed to. There was something underneath what she'd said, something she hadn't explained, and I found myself wanting to know what it was more than I'd wanted to know anything in a long while. My phone rang on the drive home. Sarah, of course. "Well," she said, already laughing. "I knew you'd like her." I watched the old houses go by outside my window, Emily's voice still sitting somewhere in my chest, that line about people stopping after 10 minutes. "I don't think she's okay," I said quietly. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from tonight." I read every comment, and if you're enjoying this story, subscribe to Honeywood Stories. You belong here. Sarah didn't let it go, obviously. She never did. She called twice that week, just to ask if I'd texted Emily, and both times I lied and said I was busy with an order. The truth was, I didn't know what to say to her. What did you say to someone who told you goodnight like it was an apology? Emily solved that problem herself. She showed up at the workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, a plate of cookies balanced in one hand, looking like she'd almost turned around twice before making it to the door. "I hope this isn't strange," she said, standing just outside the doorway like she needed permission to cross it. "Only slightly," I said, and she laughed for the first time since I'd known her. It was a small laugh, surprised out of her, like she hadn't expected herself to do it, and didn't quite know what to do with the sound afterward. She set the cookies down on the corner of my workbench, careful not to get sawdust on the plate, and stood there a moment like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to sit. I nodded toward the stool without saying anything, and she took it slowly, tucking her hands into her lap the same way she had in the truck that first night. She stayed most of the afternoon. The light through the windows moved across the floor while we talked, and somewhere outside a dog barked twice and went quiet. She watched me sand down the legs of a chair that had come in with 3 broken spindles, and she asked questions I didn't expect, not about the wood itself, but about why. Why fix something instead of just replacing it? Why keep the scratches instead of sanding them all the way out and hiding them? "Some of the marks tell you something," I said, running my thumb along a groove in the old wood. "Where it's been, who used it. You lose all that if you make it look brand new." She looked at the chair for a long moment, quiet in a way that felt like she was turning the idea over carefully. "I like that," she said finally. that the marks get to stay. Rusty took to her immediately, which didn't surprise me. Rusty liked everybody, but Emily seemed genuinely delighted by it, kneeling down right there on the sawdust floor to scratch behind his ears, while he leaned his whole body against her leg, like he'd known her for years instead of minutes. The following week, the library needed a new bookshelf for the children's section, low enough for small hands to reach, and Emily asked, almost shyly, if I'd build it. I did, and she came by most evenings after closing to help paint it, the two of us working in comfortable quiet, while the radio played low in the background, and the paint fumes mixed with the smell of cut pine. She had paint on her wrist one evening, and didn't notice until I pointed it out, and she laughed again, that same surprised sound, quick and a little embarrassed. The town festival came around in early October, the kind of thing Millbrook had done every single year since before I was even born. Funnel cakes, a small band up on a wooden stage, kids running between the booths with cotton candy stuck to their fingers. The air smelled like fried dough and wood smoke, and strings of lights hung crooked between the lampposts along Main Street. Emily came with me, and for the first time I watched her really relax out there in the open, her shoulders dropping in a way I hadn't seen before, laughing when Rusty stole a hot dog clean off a stranger's plate, and nobody could even be mad about it because of how pleased he looked with himself afterward. Emily laughed until she had to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, and something in me settled just watching her do it. It was later that night, sitting on the tailgate of my truck with the festival lights glowing behind us, that she told me about her mother. She got sick when I was 23, Emily said, looking straight ahead into the dark instead of at me, her voice careful and even. Nothing sudden. It happened slow, over years, a little worse every season. I was supposed to go to graduate school that fall. I'd gotten in, if you can believe that. I wanted to write children's books. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I deferred for a year, then another. Eventually I just stopped applying altogether and let the whole idea go quiet. You never went back, I said. It wasn't really a question. Someone had to be there, she said simply, like it had never once felt like a choice to her. I never minded. I don't think about it much anymore. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't tell her she should have gone, or that it wasn't fair, or any of the things that would have sounded like advice coming out of my mouth. I just sat there next to her in the dark, and after a while, she leaned her shoulder against mine, just slightly, like she was testing whether it was allowed. It was a few weeks later that I found the notebook. She'd left it on my workbench by accident, tucked under a stack of sandpaper, and I only noticed it because the cover was worn soft at the corners, the way books get when someone's carried them everywhere for a long time. I opened it to the first page before I even realized what it was. Stories. Half-finished, handwritten, careful. A fox who couldn't find his way home. A lighthouse keeper's daughter waiting for a boat that never came. The handwriting got smaller toward the bottom of each page, like she'd been trying to fit more in before she ran out of nerve to keep writing at all. I closed it after the first page. I didn't read any further, even though something in me wanted to. It didn't feel like mine to read, whatever she'd been quietly building in there, so I set it aside and returned it to her the next morning, without a word about what was inside. She must have realized what I'd done, because when she took it back, she held it against her chest for a second, studying my face carefully. You didn't read it, she said, not quite a question. Wasn't mine to read. Something shifted in her expression then, something quiet and grateful, like she hadn't expected that kind of restraint from anyone, maybe not even from herself. Have you ever put your own dream on hold for someone you love? Tell me below. We never judge here. It was 3 days later that the letter came. I was at the workshop when Emily called and asked, in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all, if I could come by. I found her sitting at her kitchen table with an envelope in front of her, already opened, the paper trembling slightly in her hands, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were wet and rimmed red like she'd been crying for a while before I got there. She folded the letter before I could see what it said and slid it into a drawer, closing it with more force than it needed. It's nothing, she said, wiping her face fast, like she could undo the crying just by deciding to stop. I'm fine, really. I didn't push, but I noticed the way her hands were still shaking when she poured the coffee a few minutes later, and I noticed she never once looked at that drawer again the whole time I was there, like it had already been closed for good. It was Emily's mother who told me, not Emily. I ran into her at the grocery store a week later, standing over a cart of canned soup, and she mentioned it so plainly I almost didn't understand what she was saying at first. A fellowship. Some prestigious writing program for children's authors. Only a handful of spots in the whole country. The kind of thing people waited years to even be considered for. Emily had applied months ago, quietly, never expecting to get in, never even telling anyone she'd sent it off. She'd gotten in, last remaining seat. She had to decide within the month, and the program itself was clear across the country, further than Emily had ever lived from Millbrook in her whole life. She's going to say no, her mother said, shaking her head like she'd seen this exact thing coming a long time ago, and had already grieved it once. She always says no. She said no to the first one, too, back when I got sick. I found Emily at the library that evening, shelving books in the back, with more focus than shelving books usually required, her jaw tight, her movements sharp and quick, instead of her usual careful pace. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She didn't turn around right away. When she finally did, her face had that careful, closed look people get when they've practiced staying calm for a long time. "Because staying always felt easier than leaving," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, Mason." I wanted to tell her not to go. God, some part of me wanted that so badly it scared me a little. Wanted to ask her to stay in Millbrook, stay at the library, stay close enough that I could keep seeing her every evening the way I'd gotten used to over these past few months. But I kept thinking about that notebook, the small, careful handwriting getting smaller toward the bottom of the page. The way she'd looked at that bookshelf and said she liked that the marks get to stay. I didn't say any of that to her yet. I needed to think it through first. Needed to be sure of what I actually believed before I said it out loud to her. Sarah found me a few nights later, staring at nothing in the workshop, a chisel in my hand, that I hadn't actually used in 20 minutes. "You look terrible," she said, settling onto the stool Emily usually took, like she belonged there too. I told her everything. The letter, the fellowship, the way Emily was already halfway to saying no before anyone even asked her to stay, before anyone had to talk her out of it at all. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, which wasn't like her, not one bit. "If you really love someone," she finally said, watching me carefully, "don't make their world smaller." I didn't answer her right away. I didn't need to. I already knew what I had to do, even if I hated every part of it. There was one thing of Emily's father's still sitting in the corner of my workshop, covered under an old tarp, a writing desk, cracked down one leg, drawers that stuck no matter how you pulled them, the finish long gone dull and gray with age. Emily had mentioned once, almost in passing, that it used to be his, that he'd written letters at it every Sunday morning before he passed away when she was still a teenager, and that it had sat in her mother's garage ever since, too broken to use and too precious to anyone to just throw away. I'd asked her mother to bring it to me weeks earlier, before any of this happened, back when I only meant it as a small, quiet gift. Now, standing there looking at it, it felt like something else entirely. I spent 3 nights on that desk after the workshop closed, working late by lamplight with Rusty asleep in the corner. The radio turned down so low it was almost just a hum under the sound of sanding. Repaired the cracked leg first, fitting a new piece of oak in seamlessly, clamping it overnight so the glue would set right. Freed the drawers one by one, sanding down the swollen wood until they slid smooth again, testing each one twice to be sure. Sanded the top down slow and careful, the way my father taught me years ago, until the grain underneath came back to life beneath my hands, honey-colored and warm again, after all that time in a dark garage. I didn't try to make it look new, though. I left the small scratches, the water ring near the corner, the little gouge where a pen must have slipped once, years and years ago, the marks that told you where something had been. I gave it to her the day before she was set to leave, loaded careful into the back of my truck. No ribbon, no speech prepared, nothing rehearsed. She stood in her mother's driveway in the early morning light and put her hand flat on the surface of the wood, for a long time, without saying anything at all. "You fixed it," she said finally, her voice thick with something she was trying hard to hold back. "I kept the marks," I said. "Figured you'd want those to stay." She looked at me then, and I understood that whatever she said next, she'd already made her decision. And it wasn't the one I'd hoped for the night before, lying awake turning it over. But watching her hand rest steady on that desk, I knew somehow it was the right one anyway. The bus station in Millbrook was small, just a bench and a covered awning and a schedule board, that hadn't been updated since I was a kid riding my bike past it. The morning was cold enough that our breath showed, and Emily had her father's old scarf wound twice around her neck, the same gray one that used to hang in her mother's front closet. I drove her there the next morning, the truck quiet except for the radio turned down low. Neither of us said much the whole way. There didn't seem to be a version of the conversation that would make any of it easier, so neither of us tried to find one. "You don't have to say anything," she told me, standing by the bus with her one suitcase gripped in both hands. I know too," I said. She reached up and touched my jaw, just briefly, her hand cold from the morning air, her eyes searching mine for something I hoped she found. Then she picked up her suitcase and got on the bus without looking back right away. I watched through the window as she found a seat near the front. She looked back once, right as the bus pulled away from the curb, and even through the glass I could see she was smiling, tears running down anyway, the two things happening at once like they didn't need to make sense together at all. I stood on that platform until the bus was long out of sight down the highway. A year passed slower than I expected, and faster than I wanted, both at once. Then, one gray Tuesday morning, a package arrived at the workshop with no return address I recognized, just her handwriting on the front, careful as ever. Inside was a book. A children's book, hardcover, a fox on the front standing at the edge of a forest, looking for something just out of view. I opened to the first page. The dedication was short, just one line, but I read it 3 times before I could set the book down. For the man who believed in my stories before I did. I heard about the book tour before I heard from Emily herself. Sarah again, of course, practically shouting into the phone that Emily's publisher had scheduled a stop at the Millbrook Library, one afternoon only, as part of some small-town tour her editor had insisted on adding. I don't think Sarah understood why my hands wouldn't stop shaking the whole time she told me. I hadn't heard Emily's voice in almost a year, not since a handful of short phone calls that trailed off into silences neither of us knew how to fill anymore. Both of us too careful with each other, too afraid of asking for something the other couldn't give. The library was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs set up between the shelves I'd built myself years back. Children sitting cross-legged on the floor with their parents standing behind them near the windows. Somebody had taped a poster of the fox from her book cover to the front desk. I stood at the very back, half hidden by the new arrival's shelf, my hands jammed in my pockets so nobody would see them shaking, and watched Emily walk in from the side door. She looked the same, and she didn't. Her hair was down instead of pulled back tight. She wore it like someone who'd finally stopped hiding from things. There was a quiet confidence in the way she crossed the room now, nothing like the woman who used to walk a little faster than everyone else so as not to be noticed. When she sat down in the little chair they'd set up for her, and opened her book to read to the children, her voice was steady, in a way I'd never once heard from her before. The sentences coming easy and warm, like she'd finally figured out exactly where they belonged. The children leaned in when the fox found his way home, and I watched Emily's face soften at the exact same line, like it still surprised her every time. She saw me about halfway through the reading. Her eyes found mine across the room and stayed there for just a second, before she kept going, but I noticed her hand tighten slightly on the page, just for a moment. Afterward, once the crowd thinned out and the last child had gotten their book signed with a careful, looping signature, we ended up standing near the window at the back, the same window that looked out over Maple Street where she'd once pointed out the carved trim on that old sagging Victorian. Neither of us said anything for a while. Outside, the evening light was turning the old houses along Maple Street a soft gold, the same street she'd once stopped on to admire hand-carved trim. It wasn't the same kind of silence as that first dinner all those months ago. This one had weight to it, like both of us were carrying something we didn't quite know how to put down yet. I wrote hundreds of pages this past year, she finally said, looking out the window instead of at me, her voice quiet. New settings, new characters. I tried so hard to write about somewhere else, anywhere else. She paused, and I watched her throat move as she swallowed. But every single story somehow found its way back here, back to this street, this library. I didn't say anything right away. I was too busy trying to get the words right in my head before I let them out. I never stopped making room for you, I said finally. The whole year. Never once thought about filling that space up with anything else. She turned to look at me then, and whatever she saw written across my face made her eyes fill up all over again, though this time she didn't try to wipe it away or hide it from me. I don't remember which of us moved first. I remember the evening sun was coming low and gold through the library windows, and there was nobody left in the building but the two of us, and the only sound was the old clock above the checkout desk ticking on like it always had. When I finally kissed her, it was slow and quiet, the kind of thing that didn't need an audience to mean something real. She held onto the front of my shirt with one hand, like she was steadying herself, and I felt her let out a breath she must have been holding since the day she got on that bus. 6 months after that, the mornings looked different, though most of the pieces stayed the same as they'd always been. Coffee at 6, black, still no sugar, except now there were 2 cups sitting on the counter instead of 1, and some mornings Emily got to the pot before I did, and had mine already poured by the time I came down the stairs. Rusty still waited by the door most mornings, though half the time he'd already spent the whole night curled up near the fireplace with Emily's feet propped against his side, while she wrote late into the evening, the lamp glowing warm in the corner long after I'd gone up to bed. I'd come down some nights just to check on her and find her exactly like that, pen still moving, like the story wouldn't let her go yet. She kept a small desk in the corner of the workshop now, the same one, repaired scratches and all, the water ring still there near the corner, where she worked most afternoons while I sanded chair legs a few feet away. The two of us quiet together in that same easy way we'd first found on that awkward first dinner. Except now the quiet didn't need any explaining at all. The old bookshelf still sat in the children's section at the library, a little more scuffed now from years of small hands pulling books off the shelf, the librarian's own book proudly displayed on top where everyone could see it. Emily's first notebook sat safe on a shelf in our bedroom, no longer half-finished in her mind even if the pages themselves still were. Its later stories filled in a different notebook entirely, one she kept close now, and never once left behind by accident. The writing desk held a place of honor by the workshop window, morning light hitting the old wood just right every day around 7, and some mornings I'd catch her running her palm over that same water ring near the corner before she started writing, like she was saying good morning to it. And some evenings, when the festival lights came back around every October like clockwork, Rusty still tried to steal food clean off strangers' plates, and Emily still laughed until she had to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. The same sound that had first settled something in me all those months ago on that same tailgate. One quiet morning, I was setting up at my workbench when the door opened and Emily walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a stack of paper tucked carefully under her arm. She set my coffee down beside the plane I'd been using and placed the manuscript flat on the workbench in front of me, straightening the pages with both hands. "Finished?" I asked. She shook her head, a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. The same smile I'd been falling for since that very first quiet dinner. "No," she said. "Our next one." My sister thought she was daring me to take a quiet woman to dinner. She had no idea she was introducing me to the person who would turn an ordinary life into my favorite story. If this story stayed with you even a little, subscribe to Honeywood Stories. Every week we share another heartfelt romance about ordinary people whose lives change in extraordinary ways. Until next time, take care of yourself. You belong here.